All right, I want to welcome all of you to Summer School 2005, sponsored by the Foundation for the Science of Being. I guess you know who I am, or you probably wouldn't be here. It's my great privilege and honor to be here again for a further summer school together, and I thank you all for your presence and your love of this idea and your dedication to it, and I take no credit for the fact that you have been attracted to this occasion, as I have been attracted to it in many, many ways. And so we're going to have a wonderful week together. There's no way I can tell you what has happened during this year that has helped to form and to bring this time about, this time together during which we will look more deeply into the nature of reality and the science of Christian Science and the great categories of being. Naturally, I always come, I think I'm prepared, and then a couple of hours before I'm to begin this opening night, everything begins to fluctuate. And nothing looks the same. Everything that looked so good that I wanted to say to you somehow takes on a different perspective and a different place value in the whole setting of what is happening. And the idea is so big and so dynamic, and that's actually what we want to talk so much about over these next days, is the dynamic of the spiritual idea, the movement of the spiritual idea. And that's what we mean by the calculus. And if you recall, I had to actually look myself again to see what the subject was, but I knew it I knew it had to do with the Fourfold Calculus of Being, and that has just been working and working and working on my consciousness over the last months and the last year, and I cannot help but to presume that it has been working on you too. And so when I went to try to recapture what I wanted to say to you this evening, of course it started to restructure, and I thought, well, that there would be so many different standpoints of consciousness here as we begin this time together. And although we have many of you returning from last year when we had our last summer school together, and I know that so many of you have been working with the recordings from last year and really drilling yourself in everything that we saw last year about the 6th and the 7,000 year period standpoints of consciousness, and yet there will be many here this evening that have not had that background. And so I wanted to try to build up in a way that would take in every one of us, that would include us all, so that we can go forward on a footing that is common to each and all of us, and to build solidly right from the first. And so I'm going to try to do that this evening. I will begin by telling you a little bit about the origin of this class. Actually, you know that this class is intended to be a further insight, a further vision to what we were doing last year together. And last year we were looking at that 7,000 year period standpoint of divine love, wanting to understand that more clearly, wanting to look more deeply into the question of the practice of the 7,000 year period. And so we did that to some degree, and we began to unfold within ourselves, within our own conscious understanding, to a greater and greater degree, what that 7,000-year period is and what it means. And for those of you who were here, we can recap together. For those of you who weren't here, we can give you a bit of an insight into what took place. Namely, that we were echoing and voicing the fact that the 7,000-year period standpoint of consciousness, the standpoint of divine love, really the standpoint of that seventh synonymous term for God in the order of the answer to the question, what is God, on page 465 of the Christian Science textbook, that as we began to look more deeply into the wonder of that 7,000-year period, the wonder of the fact that nothing has been dawning on mankind except the nature of God, except the idea of the divine nature of being as mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love, that this accounts for the whole history of mankind. It accounts for the history of every individual who has ever walked this earth. It accounts for the history of, therefore, the individual consciousness, the collective consciousness, the universal consciousness. That there is, in fact, a deep structure, reality, pattern in being that is patterning everything, that is shaping everything according to itself, in the likeness of its own self. And that pattern is the pattern of those seven. Those seven, whether we call them days of creation, or whether we call them the seven synonymous terms, actually the 7 days of creation in the Bible, are the first great depicting of that sevenfold nature of God. And the Bible sets that forth. It sets forth that divinity, that divine nature that is taught by Christian Science, that is at the core of Christian Science, that is at the heart of the Christian Science textbook. In recapitulation, when she asks the question, what is God? Imagine after having covered all those chapters. How many chapters was that? 13, 14 chapters. And finally she asks the question, what is God? As though finally you are able to grasp the question and the answer, because you have gone the way of those first 14 chapters. Now I can ask you point blank, what is God? And so she will draw then from everything that she has given in those first 14 chapters to succinctly subsume the single most important question in the universe, in the world, in the individual consciousness, in the collective, the universal consciousness. The most important question there is, finally she asks it. And doesn't only ask it, but gives the answer. And apparently feels that if we have gone the way of those first 14 chapters, that we are ready to really get to the bottom line, to the real question, what is God? And the answer to that question, what is God? Through really 7 synonymous terms, which she qualifies in a fourfold way. She says that God is incorporeal. This is actually the word, a word sense. Divine, a Christ sense. Supreme, a Christianity sense. And infinite, a science sense. So God is incorporeal, divine, supreme, infinite mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love. So she is gathering up, really, everything that has gone before, the whole of human history, the whole of biblical history, the whole of her textbook, gathers everything up then into that one question. And it's the one question that really was answered right from the beginning. Right from the beginning of the Bible. And you know that as Christian Scientists, we root ourselves in our two textbooks, the Bible and the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. And so you really see that then, that when she closes out that chapter on recapitulation, where she has put the question, placed the question directly and clearly in consciousness, that then she really goes to the core of the answer to that question. And this is what we see in the Key to the Scriptures, where she presents the two chapters, Genesis and Apocalypse, gathering up really the sum and substance of what is taught in Genesis, with its main accentuation on the sevenfold nature of God. And she takes those days of creation then, you see. Having asked the question, then she can give the key to everything. And that key is, first of all, those 7 days of creation. And secondly, she gives the chapter Apocalypse, in which she focuses on the fourfold operation of God, so that we have the sevenfold nature of God and the fourfold operation of God. As we look more deeply into that fourfold operation of God, we see that it has a dimensional ontology within it. It has the ability to translate itself, to come to every level, to show itself forth on every level. So we'll find those 4 really bringing the 7 to every level of consciousness. Working, operating, moving. It's the divine dynamic that moves everything, that moves the nature, so that that sevenfold nature is not static. It isn't unmoving. It isn't waiting for you to know it, for you to be conscious of it, and then it will work. Isn't that wonderful? That something is working not because of you, but in spite of you. Not because of what the universe does or doesn't do, but in spite of what the universe does and what it doesn't do. That in fact the universe cannot do anything except to respond to the impact of this fourfold operation of being, this calculus, what we call the calculus. So we begin to get familiar already with our terminology, that when we speak about the calculus or the fourfold operation, these are one and the same. They refer to what we find really in Revelation, or in Mrs. Eddy's chapter on the Apocalypse, where she explains and renders understandable the city four square. St. John's great vision, his great revelation of the city four square, which is further understood at a yet further level as the city of our God, with its 4 cardinal points. And Mrs. Eddy therefore takes the 15th chapter to focus on the 7 synonymous terms for God, the nature of God. And she takes the 16th chapter to focus on the fourfold operation of God in its operational breadth and its operational depth, meaning that those 4 are present at every standpoint, every level of consciousness. They come to every level of consciousness. They touch every level. They express themselves at every level of consciousness. So there is no level at which those 4 are not working, are not in expression, are not the only thing that is in expression. And bringing out what, as they express the divine dynamic, bringing out the nature of God in absolutely everything, at every point in consciousness. So wherever you are, wherever we are in our understanding, and that's where we have our existence, that's where we live and move and have our being, is in the understanding, in our understanding. What is our understanding? How do we understand being? How do we understand God? That's where we are. So where we are is not a locale or a location in time and space. It's a question of consciousness. And wherever we are in our understanding, even if we seem not to understand very much at all about the divine nature and the divine operation, we are never outside of that nature and that operation. We are in the divine dynamic. We are being moved by the divine dynamic. And everything that happens to us, everything that we think we make happen, all our goals, all our efforts, all our attempts to get somewhere and do something and be someone and so forth, we think that's within us to have that power. We either feel, yes, we can really make it, we can really get somewhere and do something and do what we want to do and achieve what we want to achieve and be what we want to be on the corporate ladder or the social ladder or whatever ladder we're climbing. But it's not really so. It's not really so. We think we're in charge. We're never really in charge. I hope you don't mind that. I think it's a great relief. I think it's a beautiful thing to find out that it's not up to me, it's not up to oneself, that something else is working. And that something else is so big and so grand and so beautiful and so involved with us, really gives you the sense of love, that those categories of being, those categories that Christian Science teaches, the sevenfold nature of God and the fourfold operation of God and the infinite multidimensionality of that nature and operation, is working for you. And there's nothing you can do to enhance it or to stop it or to interfere with it or to change it. Absolutely nothing. But that nature and that operation is working on you, is changing you, is altering you. And all the big changes and all the little changes, whatever changes we go through in our experience, whatever problems we seem to have in our experience, problems are really there, they are given to us, they are really shaped, they are tailored for us, given to us, in order that we will change, in order that we be changed. And we are being changed into the likeness of the divine, being changed into the form of the same nature as the divine sevenfold nature, being formed into the fourfold calculus. That's what's going on with us. So whenever you feel that you're super self-involved, and believe me, I know that feeling, I know that experience, where one is just so self-aware and self-aware of the present problem, the current experience, the demands on oneself, just remember, just back off in your consciousness, back off and fall back into that safety net, that network that says there's a net that is holding you, a divine network that is holding you. And it's the network of the system of science. That system that is comprised of those categories that aren't just the categories of God, they're your categories, they're the categories of you You are being, capital B, in expression. You are being, small b. You are that infinite one being in expression. How can anything that you do be outside of that? How can anything that exists for you be outside of that? How can we have an infinite one and something next to the infinite one? Something beside, so that somehow we have the infinite one, and then here is my problem. My problem, which is almost as big or bigger than, seems like, the infinite one, huh? So if we would just think in consciousness, reason in consciousness about what we are saying, about how we are reasoning, huh? If we would just come out from that infinite one and reason truly in accord with it, we would find that there's nothing outside of the range and the realm of that infinitude. That everything is the one being in expression. That nothing is going on but that sevenfold nature of God operating according to the Christ calculus. The calculus is the Christ idea. It's the way the Christ idea works. How the Christ is going to work out the idea of God. Not your human idea. Not my human expectations. Not what I think is the utmost, the best, the most ideal. Not what the human considers ideal, but what the Christ knows to be ideal. To be in coincidence with the highest idea of God. This is what the calculus is working out. It is the Christ. So whenever we speak of the calculus, you know this is the Christ working. It is the Christ that has your best interest at heart, your highest good, the greatest excellence in view, and doesn't only envision that and have an idea of that, but is able to execute that, to bring that about, to carry that out to fulfillment, to complete fulfillment. So you hear really already in the calculus, or in that Christ idea, the sense that there is the seeing, the conceiving of the greatest good, the highest good, the essence of good, and then not leaving it at that, you see, not only that, but that the Christ, that would be from the word standpoint. Did we say that? To have that vision, to see that, to conceive of that good, of what is good. And this is all a question of the Christ. What is good? So often we think we know what is good. Huh? What is good for me? What's good for this experience? What would be the best thing? And we work and we try to move heaven and earth humanly and in our practice to bring that about. Not realizing that the calculus, the Christ, says that's exactly what you have to put on the altar. That's what you have to lay down before God. Put that before God. Give that up. Sacrifice that. Subject that. Subordinate that to the Christ. Subordinate that to there being a principle that is love, that wants to work with you and to bring out that good which is beyond, so far beyond what you think good is, what you have conceived good to be. And so the Christ, the calculus at the point of the word, knows, it conceives of this good. of what the idea of God is. And as the Christ, see, so the point of the Word, it conceives of that. At the point of the Christ, it begins to execute that, to bring that about. It's not just sitting and having a wonderful vision and oh, isn't that beautiful? There's nothing more beautiful, but not having the power to do anything about it, not having the will to express it, the power to express it. This is innately the Christ. And so in the calculus, you see the Christ is that power to bring it about, to bring it to manifestation, to bring it to expression. That's the Christ in the calculus. And bringing it to expression, it brings it to the fullness of that expression. It isn't just partially expressed, partially brought about, but it is brought out to the greatest extent, to the fullest measure, and this is Christianity. This is what Christianity means. Christianity says, what is it that can hold, that contains the infinite measure of that expression of good, of the idea of God, of what God has in mind? And this is Christianity. So you get the fulfilled sense in Christianity, that fullness, that fulfillment, that allness, that idea of God will fill the whole universe. Even though it seems to be all to do with you, it's filling the allness of the all. Isn't that a miracle? It's science. It isn't really a miracle. It's science that says you cannot have good in just one place. You can't have the solution to a question, to a problem, to your individual problem of being. You can't have that in just one little corner of the universe where you are, where you think you are. Because you are everywhere. You are wherever being is, being is. Wherever being, capital B is, being, small b is. And you are being, small b. You are the expression of being. And that's everywhere, really. And so what you are working out with the calculus, as you move with the calculus in consciousness, and that calculus moves with you and moves you, it is filling the whole universe. That which the Christ is bringing out, that good is filling the universe. So you can't work out something in isolation. Can you? Can you work out something all by yourself and keep it for yourself? Huh? It belongs to the whole universe. What you work out for the whole world. This is the wonder of consciousness. This is the meaning of consciousness, that consciousness is everywhere. It is ever present and omnipresent. So you work out whatever you work out. Think of it. Whatever you work out on the basis of the sevenfold nature of God and the fourfold operation of God, you really work out with the sevenfold nature of God and with the fourfold operation of God. And you work it out for all time and all space. For all times, too, you see, that you don't just work something out for this moment in time, for this place in time, for a certain period, but because you have worked it out according to the very nature of the Infinite One, the very operation of the Infinite One, you work it out infinitely. It's an infinite demonstration that you make on the basis of the calculus. And so you see that that we have that fourth point of science in the calculus, that the Christ would say these three, Word, Christ, Christianity, are one. They are science. That is science. When you understand the Word, the Christ, and Christianity, you understand science. Science will always show you that it is Word, Christ, and Christianity. That those three are one. They are one divine principle. One divine principle working. One divine principle in operation. Well, there are just so many beautiful, beautiful aspects to this calculus and to what the calculus is doing as it governs the expression of the divine nature at every level of experience. You know, I don't know how I got here, but I'm glad I did. And I wanted to tell you, I can't even remember now how we began to unfold that. We started to talk about what we were seeing last year, because I think that as we finished last year, at least for myself, and I know that one or two others mentioned to me that we had taken those seven as the days of creation, those days of creation really patterning or coining what we call the 1,000-year periods, those periods that seem to be time periods but are really the fact that the 7 days of creation, which are timeless values, are always making their impact on time, are bringing out through that sevenfold impact the whole history of mankind, the whole history of the individual, the collective, and the universal consciousness. So we were seeing that last year, and at the close of that session, one began to feel immediately what was missing. What was missing was the calculus. So I loved that fact that what we needed to do was to give to those 7,000-year periods their calculus setting. We needed to now focus. It doesn't mean that something was wrong with the previous session. It means that the accentuation was such as it was, and that now that accentuation wants to shift as the further great category of being begins to assert itself and become more predominant within consciousness. As though the Four would come in and say, now you know what you must see is that those 7 are not working on their own, they're not operating on their own, they don't move on their own. They don't move because a generation comes along, a 1,000-year period generation of sorts comes along and says, all right, we've fulfilled these requirements. We've fulfilled the requirements for the first 1,000-year period. Now a new generation has to come along and take up new requirements, so that a generation that fulfilled the requirements of the first 1,000-year period would give way to a new generation of consciousness that fulfills the requirements of the second 1,000-year period, which will be all coined and stamped with spirit. So beautiful. I never get tired of it, and apparently I don't, because every time I think I have something new to tell you, and I'm just so excited about it, I pick up something that I did 10 or 15, 17 years ago, and it's there already. I've already said it. And you are so kind. You keep coming back. You can't remember either, yeah. But it's because these categories are so deeply embedded. They are the deep structure of everything. So one keeps discovering them and rediscovering them again, and it's not really that you stay in the same place. You always rediscover what you've already discovered in a new way. There's something so new about it, so fresh, so quickening. It just picks me up. It captures my heart and carries me away. It's like that fifth day of creation where the birds they soar in the open firmament of heaven. They are filled with the aspirations of being, of life. And that's the way it feels to me. And so I'm always a little surprised when I find that I had said something or seen the same thing in a certain way. But what else can we do? We've only got 3 great categories. You know that, don't you? That we have one being, that one being begins to unfold itself, to render itself understandable through its innate categories, because that one being is science. It's science. So it is that which innately is able to render itself understood and understandable. So it does that through its scientific categories, through the categories of the science of being. What a majesty that is. That no one can get away from that. No one will ever be able to hide from that. This is built in to the experience, to each one's experience. Because the scientific method works inductively as well as deductively, you'll never get away from it. You'll never be able to escape the finding out of what God is and what you are, what you really are. You'll never be able to get away from finding out what the nature of God is and what your true nature is. How God operates and how your whole being operates in one great self-operation of being. Now, I'm not just speaking to the people in this room, but to everyone that walks this planet is learning what God is and how God operates because of science, because of the fact that being is a science. This is exactly what the 7,000-year period wants to show us, to impel upon us, to impact us with the fact that we have a science and that we cannot escape our divine salvation. We cannot escape salvation. And so one began to see at the close of that summer school that there was a shift in consciousness, that there was a need now to focus on the calculus, to begin to see how the 7 are set in the calculus, how the 7 days, you see, are held in the calculus, in the 4, and consequently how the 7,000-year periods, those periods in which the timeless stamps time with being and really puts time into the services of the timeless. Isn't that beautiful? That time has no other real purpose except to serve the timelessness of being, except to show how being is becoming. That nothing else is going on but the fact that being is becoming what it is. Where in science itself, in divine science, in absolute Christian science? No. Being doesn't need to become what it is at those levels. But at a level where we are dealing with the claim, the supposition of a mortal concept, a time concept, a temporal concept, we need something that will show us the way out of that ignorance, out of that darkness, and into the full light of the timelessness and eternity of being. That's what the 7,000-year periods show. So often a newly interested student will come along and say, why do you talk so much about time? Why are you so interested in periods of time, 7,000-year periods and so forth? As though we would be pointing up or, making a reality out of time. Whereas those 7,000-year periods, as states and stages of consciousness, begin to explain to us, to make understandable to us the fact that there actually is no time. And how do we reach the point of understanding that there is no time? By seeing the whole time concept give way through states and stages of consciousness that are patterned by the nature of God, being itself, by the eternality, the eternity of mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love, impacting the mortal consciousness, the claim that there is not that eternal fact going on, that everything else is going on but that eternal fact, everything that we have to wrestle with and struggle with on this plane of consciousness, on a plane of consciousness where there's that a claim of two, that has to be resolved. And it is resolved by the divine nature, by the fourfold operation, through the days of creation, which gradually gather their reality within consciousness and become for us numerals of infinity. Remember, if you know John Dorley, have read anything of John Dorley, how he would so often speak about the days of creation becoming numerals of infinity, numerals of consciousness. So that what begins as, and looks like a developing sense, that we develop and develop from one stage to the next stage to the following stage, gradually we begin to be reformed in consciousness and to realize that actually there is no development going on. You see, it's as we make our way in that way of that being is becoming for us. I don't know how else to say it, that what being is becoming for us what it is, isn't it? You see that? And that's the story that is built into the 7 days of creation, and it is built into the 7,000-year periods, showing us the impact of the timelessness of being on time, so that time finally gives way. And I think that for those of you who have cultured this, who have loved this over the years, and it doesn't come in a moment, it doesn't come overnight. You will be touched by it. You can be touched by it in a moment. You can be touched by it overnight. You can feel change. You can feel I see something new. I'm going in a new direction. I have a new hope, a new purpose, and a new design, a new pattern to pursue, to persevere in accord with. But you'll find that that new birth as she says about the new birth, begins with moments, but it goes on with years. It goes on with years. So that when you take up the pursuit of, the love of the science of being, don't feel it's going to, that it's the work of a moment. That's, I think, what she says. It's not the work of a moment. It begins with moments and goes on with years. So it's not a fly-by-night thing, you know, as though I can dabble into the science of being and then I go and I dabble into something else and I just dabble. I'm a professional dabbler. I know about everything, every ism, every ology, every so-called science, small s, every psychology and philosophy and everything that's out there. And I sort of classify the science of being as one of those many things. One of those many things. No, no. When you touch the science of being, you touch the thing itself. It's the thing itself. Isn't that what they always referred to in philosophy when they wanted to get to the essence, the core, the reality, the real thing that every man is really after? It's the thing itself. And that's what you have in science, in the science of being. And it has no comparison. It has no, nothing, it's not carrying along a lot of trappings with it, you know, other things from the world and other pursuits. It's single, it's only, it's holy, it's one. And that's what we have to be when we find science and we are touched by it and we feel something. Maybe someone is here tonight who hasn't ever heard anything about this science, and perhaps you'll be touched by it in some way. Something that is said or something that someone says to you will touch you. Take that and keep it single, keep it pure, keep it only. That means to love it. Begin to love it. Say there's something of promise in that. There's something that I want. Something that is of meaning to me. I want that. That thing that I feel I can't quite get my hands on it yet. I don't know what they're talking about with all these 7s and 4s and levels and so forth. And don't let that be a put off for you. Take the thing you hear that you love and keep on loving it and pursue it. Go after it. Keep it single and keep it separate from everything else in the world. Everything else. Don't compare that with, you know, I'm reading some other book on so-and-so, and so I mix them all up together, mix everything up together, and it's just one big conglomeration that doesn't really have a clarity. It doesn't have a clean line. It doesn't have a direct line. It hasn't told me what I'm really after and how to get there. And what you're after and how to get there are the same thing. They're the same thing. What you are after is the divine nature. And how you will get there is through the divine nature. What you're after is the divine operation. To have God being the one operating principle in your life, in your existence. And how you will get that is by going that way, by going through the divine operation. So the goal and the method, the way to the goal, are the same thing. It's so beautiful. It's not that you have a goal and then you say, oh my gosh, how am I going to get there? And oh, I have to read this book and read that book and do exercises and laws and meditate and pray and whatever things we think we have to do to reach a standpoint of consciousness, a form of consciousness that is ideal. Whereas in the science of being, the moment you touch the categories, you touch that consciousness. You're one with that consciousness. You're in that consciousness. When you touch the 7 synonymous terms and their ideas, you are some measure one with the 7 synonymous terms and their ideas. One with the nature of God. One with the nature of God. And that nature has built into it the calculus. In other words, it knows how to get you. Beautiful. It knows how to get you, how to draw you in. Sometimes love plays tricks on us. Beautiful tricks of love to get us in. And to draw us in even more. So we get drawn in and drawn in. It's the attraction of love, the attractor of love. Because those 7 are love, those 4 are love, they're divine love, they're the divine principle. Love, which has a design, has a purpose to save all, to save you. So you are drawn in. You are attracted by them. Now, you can respond to that as your nature, which is of the same nature as God's nature, can give something to that process, to that operation. So you can give your best to this fact that something has touched you and that there's something that you want to pursue, something that you want to see more. You already have the divine nature within you. This is actually what the chapter on prayer would show us. The very first chapter in the Christian Science textbook would show us that we really already reflect the divine. We have the divine within us. So I can say to that little spark that I have seen, to that glimmer, to that light, to that thing that I hear and I love and I feel the promise about, I want that. That's what I want. That's my heart's desire. I desire that. So you know how that first chapter of prayer begins with the desire within us. It says, actually, that desire is the desire of mind. It's mind within you. It's mind, capital M, within you, that wants this idea, that is drawn. That's why we're all here tonight together, because we are already one with the divine mind. We already have the divine mind within us, because we want this idea. We desire it. We want to pursue it. And then we would see that actually we have all those beautiful qualities that we can put into the service of that desire, the desire for that idea, that we would be grateful, to be grateful for what we have seen about this idea. To be grateful, were you ever just grateful that God is sevenfold in nature, and what that sevenfold nature is? I know that you have been, Ever been just grateful that God, Spirit, is mind, spirit, soul, principle, life, truth, and love? To be grateful, to love that fact, to carry that fact around, to begin to weigh it. We spend so much of our day time and nighttime, weighing and carrying around other things, don't we? Weighing the consideration whether we should do this or do that, whether we should take this step or not take this step, or what we should pursue as our career, and how to go about that, weighing all kinds of things. But I wonder how much time we spend weighing mind and spirit. If you weigh something, you say, what's the difference between? What's the value of mind versus, not versus, but in comparison to spirit? When I weigh things, when I weigh values, they become more distinct. They become distinct values. Gosh, this is all spirit. We are talking about that second standpoint. And so they become more distinct. They become more distinct. They become clearer, even more definite, you see. And so whatever touches you in this class, I hope something does, begin to weigh it. Begin to ask these questions. How is this different than what I've seen in the world, and what I have found in the world as those isms, analogies, and different psychologies and philosophies that would attempt to solve the question of being, the problems of my existence? How is this different? You know, you'll only find out how it's different by going to the 7 and to the 4. This is how you will find out the difference between what the science of being is giving you, the love of the science of being, the love of the divine principle is giving you, versus what the world has to offer. So you give your very best qualities to the vision that you've seen, to that insight, to that touch. And you begin to become very definite about that. That would be soul, wouldn't it? So that soul says you have to make that a rule in your life now. Soul is all to do with the rule of soul, and it means that whatever you have done at the point of mind and of spirit, you must do again, and again, and again, and again, and again, so you get that reiteration of soul, that true sense of repeating. It's not a repeating, it's a reiterating, it's a self-referral of constantly referring back. In other words, don't drop what you see as your vision after 2 or 3 days. Let it go, having given some love to it, some weighing, some consideration, some pondering, that you would let it go. Soul says, don't let it go. Keep going back to it. Return to it. Return. Very much what you had in the 4,000-year period with the prophets who were bringing in the sense of the coming age of the Christ, and this sense of excuse me, I just am assuming that you know so much, and I don't know whether you really know so much or not, but it's that they would say to Israel, return to the Lord, return. Go back again to that which you know. So if they were in the 4,000-year period, it was as though they would say, go back to your vision of the first 1,000-year period. Go back to your second 1,000-year period where you kept that vision pure, where you built that ark of understanding, where you got into the ark, where you rode over the floods, where you never let go of that vision, where it just followed you and you stuck to it. You stayed with it. Return to your third 1,000-year period where you went constantly back to the first and the second. See, it was going back to the first and the second that enabled the children of Israel to go through the wilderness, not to stop somewhere else, not to stay in Egypt. So these are qualities that are within us all to be called upon, to be reflected.